Daf Yomi, tractate Bava Batra, or Bava Batra, depending on your pronunciation. Daf 82b, top of the page. Actually, we were in the middle of an idea, so I'll start from the last line on the previous Amud 82a with the words Kana Shlosha, Kana Kar Bakama. The Mishnah teaches, so the idea is Kana Shlosha Kana Kar Kama, Amar B'chia Baraba, Amar B'yachlan, Harei Zekana Tachteen, V'nehen, V'chutz Lehen, Kemelo Ora V'salo. The Mishnah teaches if one bought 3 trees, he has acquired the ground along with them. The Gemara asks, and how much of the field does he acquire? Rabbi Chia bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says, this buyer has acquired the ground that is located underneath the trees and the area between them. But that's it. And with regard to the space outside the trees and their branches, he has acquired an area sufficient for a gather of figs. Okay, it's not it. Actually, there's an area outside the trees, and that area is an area sufficient for a gather of figs and his basket in hand to stand close to the tree. So maybe a few feet, I'm guessing. Kimelo ora visalo. Now we're on the top of 82b with the words Maskif la Rabbi Elazar. Matkif la Rabbi Elazar. As you may have noticed, this Daf Yomi shir is for a very wide audience, so the pronunciations of Hebrew oscillates back and forth from the traditional standard Israeli Sephardic pronunciation to various types of different pronunciations of Hebrew that would include just the modern, or let's say Ashkenazic, Eastern European pronunciation, but even to a specialized form of that, which would be what I call the Israeli Litvish pronunciation, like the way someone would read it in the Panovich Yeshiva. I might start with that so you can get a sampling for that. So I'm sampling various, and there's mixtures and variations and gradations and different colors and tones of each of these accents. And who knows, I might even try to go for some Yemenite, with the thuf. But at any rate, what I find really powerful is a powerful enunciation. No, that's not the word. Pronunciation, a certain proclamation, but it has to, I can't find the word right now, but it has to do with sound that makes an effect, and that effect affects the consciousness. Utterance, maybe, is the Israeli Litvish pronunciation. I'll start with that now. It really drives the learning. Maybe that's because the Litvaks in the Lithuanian Jews in Volozhin, the first yeshiva of Chaim Volozhin, really got the yeshiva movement started, and all the major yeshivas, like let's say Lakewood and other yeshivish Litvish places, came from that Vilna or that or Volozhin kind of influence, and I find that pronunciation really hits the nail on the head, I guess, and really gives that feeling. So I'll start with that. That in Israeli they do it. In Israel they do that too. Maskif lo Rabbi Elozo hashu der ein loi oir v'sala yesh loi der ein loi der alachidri oir v'sala yesh loi oir v'sala yesh loi. So there's a lot of feeling there, He has acquired an area sufficient for a gather of figs. Rabbi Elazar objects to this. Now that the halacha is the buyer has no path and must purchase a path through the field to access his trees, if so, does he have a possession of an area for the gatherer's basket? The Gemara elaborates, he has no path, even though he has no other means of gaining access to the trees, as the ground he acquired along with the trees is considered another land and is not part of the rest of the field. Why then would he have possession of an area for a gather and his basket. Omer of Zero. Omer of Zero. It's a real good feeling there, Omer of Zero. Medire Rabbeinu nilmad shloish hu te'enoi derech. Hoshnaim yeshloi. Domalei be'aro didach v'chaimei. Reb Zera says from the statement, the objection of our teacher we learn, meaning the objection of our teacher, we learn that it is the case of the 3 trees that the owner of the trees has no path, and as the buyer acquired a separate piece of land along with the trees. But in the case of two trees, the buyer has a path, as he says to the owner of the field, "My trees are standing on your land, and as I am allowed to use your field to tend to my trees, I have the right to walk through your land to reach them." Omalei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak leRava. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to Rava, "Leima Rabbi Elazar leislei dishmuel Rabbi. The Omer Shmuel halachak Rabbi Akiva. The Omer Moichel ba'ayin Yafeh Moichel." Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says to Rava, "Shall we say that Rav Elazar does not accept the opinion of Shmuel, who was his teacher? As Shmuel says, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who says one who sells generously. According to Rabbi Akiva, one sells in a manner that is advantageous for the buyer. Rabbi Akiva is seeing the good in people. He is famously the one who said, "You should love your neighbor as yourself." Zeklal godol b'Torah. This is a big principle in the Torah. So Rabbi Akiva is pashut. He's seeing from he's going l'shitaso. He really practiced loving another Jew. Therefore, he's going to say that anyone who sells a property sells with the buyer in mind. He wants to benefit the buyer. I'll give you a little extra. I'll always do. So it makes sense that he would say Ke'en Yafeh, Ba'ayin Yafeh. Makes a lot of sense. Rabbi Akiva says that according to Rabbi Akiva, one sells in a manner. How are we doing on time? Rabbi Akiva says that one who sells in a manner is advantageous to the buyer and is presumed to have included in the sale even items that were not explicitly specified. In this case, as he has sold a tree that remains on his property, the seller grants the buyer the right to access his tree. Sometimes people don't see the forest because of all the trees. All those trees in the way. Where's the forest? Where's the forest? All these trees, I can't see the forest. You're looking at it. Oh, that's the forest. Amarle lo mitkome masnisin Rabbi Akiva. Rava said to him, even if Rabbi Elazar himself agrees with Rabbi Akiva, the Mishnah cannot be explained in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Rather, the Mishnah must be in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who hold that one who sells does sparingly. And the difficulty that Rabbi Elazar raised against Rabbi Yochanan is predicated on the fact that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. Mamai, from where does Rava derive that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? Midiktani higdu liyashve, v'isot medaitach Rabbi Akiva hi amay yashve, amar moichel be'en yafeh moichel. So we're trying to establish how we know that the Mishnah is not in the opinion according to Rabbi Akiva. From the fact that the Mishnah teaches, if the 3 trees grew, the owner of the land may cut down the branches to extend his field. And if it enters your mind that the Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, why may he cut them down? Doesn't Rabbi Akiva say that one who sells generously? Why is that generosity? He may cut it down. Oh, why do you have to say that he may cut it down? Of course you can cut it down. You can do whatever you want. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's the thought. Anyway, Amar le Emodom Rabbi Akiva Gabi Bol Vedus Tilo Machashi Ara Gabi Ilan Mi Shematale. Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak said to him, does this not prove that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? You can say that Rabbi Akiva stated his ruling in the case of a pit and a cistern that are situated in a field belonging to another, which one sells in a generous manner, as they do not weaken the land. But did you hear him say that the seller is generous toward the buyer with regard to a tree, which can weaken the land? Mi lo modi Rabbi Akiva be'ilan anotel tzarch sadechavero shekoitzitz meloi maldea mimal gavim machreisho. Doesn't Rabbi Akiva concede in the case of a tree that leans out into the field of another, in which the owner of the field cuts down the branches until the full height of an ox goad, the handle that protrudes over a plow? Since the extending branches impede his efforts to plow his fields, it is permitted for him to cut them down. This indicates that even according to Rabbi Akiva, one does not grant privileges that are detrimental to his own interest. If so, the Mishnah can be explained even in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, which indicates that Rabbi Elazar does not accept his ruling. Tanya Kavasi de Rabbi Chia Barabba Hare Zekanatachtin Eveden Vechutolahen Gimalayoides Sadali Yoid Sadali. Okay. The Gemara points out, is taught in Brita, in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Chia Barabba, if one buys 3 trees in a field belonging to another, this buyer has acquired the ground that is found underneath the trees and the area between them, and outside the trees and their branches, an area sufficient for a gather of figs and his basket. Amar le Abai Rav Yosef. Abai says, Rav Yosef, Oisan Oira V'Saloi Mizoran. Amar le Tanisua Achitzoin Zereas Haderech. Abai said to Yosef, those areas around the trees are designated for a gather of figs and his basket are used for this purpose only at specific times. Who sows that land during the rest of the year? The owner of the trees or the owner of the field. Rav Yosef said to him, you learned the answer in a Mishnah 99b. If one owns a garden that is surrounded by the garden of another, the owner of the inner garden has a right to a path through the outer garden. Even so, the owner of the outer garden may sow the path. Amar le midami hasam les le say that the lokeach aval hacha is le say the lokeach amar le kamit napi pere. Abai said to him, are these cases comparable? There, in the case of the outer and inner gardens, there is no loss suffered by the buyer when the owner of the outer garden sows the path, as he can still pass through it. But here, there is a loss for the buyer, as the one who bought the trees says to the owner of the field, the fruits that fall from the trees will become soiled by the plants. This case is similar to the only to the last clause of that Mishnah, which states the owner of the inner garden is given a side path so that he suffers a loss of some kind because he cannot take the shortest path to reach his garden. Both this owner of the inner garden and the owner of the outer garden are not permitted to sow the path. Similarly here too, neither the owner of the trees nor the owner of the field are permitted to sow the place designated for the gather of the figs and his basket. The Gemara comments, is it taught in Batra according to the opinion of Bava? This buyer has acquired the ground that is found underneath the trees and the area between them and outside of the trees and their branches outside the area sufficient for a gatherer of figs in his basket, and both this owner of the field and that owner of the trees are not permitted to sow it. V'kama yehe b'neim Rav Yosef Amar Yehuda Amar Shmuel mi'arba amos v'ad shmona Rav Amar Rav Nachman Amar Shmuel mishmona ad esrei v'ad sheish esrei Amar le'abai Rav Yosef lo tiploga le Rav Nachman t'nan masin gavase. The Gemara inquires, how much space must there be between the three trees for them to be considered one unit, which means that the land is acquired by the owner of the trees, or Yosef says, or Yehuda says, or Shmuel says. The distance between the trees must be from 4 cubits to 8 cubits. Rav says, or Nachman says, or Shmuel says. It must be from 8 cubits to 16 cubits. Bava says to Yosef, do not disagree with Rav Nachman, as we learned in the Mishnah, in accordance with his opinion. Ditzanan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Climb 4:9, one who plants his vineyard 16 cubits by 16 cubits, meaning that he leaves 16 cubits between each row of vines, is permitted to bring other species of seeds to empty spaces between the rows from there. This is not considered the violation of a biblical prohibition with regard to sowing diverse crops. We just had that in last week's parsha, by the way, which is very interesting. Also, timing. Diverse crops in a vineyard, which is one of the prohibitions of the diverse kinds. Amar Rav Yehuda, Ma'aseh b'tzal mo'in, v'echad sheno zekan m'sheish esrei al sheish esrei, v'haya ha'ofech shtei shurois l'tzad echad, v'zoreh es hanir, l'shana acheres ha'ofech as ashar l'mikom zereh, v'zoreh es abur, u'ba ma'aseh lefnei chachamim v'yitiru. Rabbi Yehuda, we're holding on time, 16 minutes, we're cutting it close. Rabbi Yehuda said there was an incident in the city of Salmon where one individual planted his vineyard 16 by 16 cubits, and he would turn the branches of 2 rows that were facing each other to one side so that there was a space of 16 cubits between the 2 rows. And so the clearing, the following year he would turn the branches to the place that it was sown the year before, and would sow the land that had been left uncultivated the previous year, as it had been filled with the branches from the vines. And the incident came before the sages, and they permitted it. This demonstrates the 16 cubits between plants is required for them to be considered separate units. Amar le ana lo yadana ela ovda hava. Rav Yosef said to them, I do not know about this, but there was a similar incident to be continued on tomorrow's daf.